Welcome back. So we just recently got the Bite of Flame banner, and we got a bunch of new skills introduced on there, such as Godlike Reflexes, Dragon's Wrath 4, a new inheritable, so on and so forth. But basically I figured it would be beneficial to at least give some idea of how these skills work, but also who they work best on, because there is quite a bit to digest with each of these skills. Not all of them per se, but a good amount of them would like some attention, at least so if you are to summon for these skills in particular, that you know exactly what you want to do with them. But regardless, I'm here basically to just go over a general idea of like good candidates for each of these new skills, explain how they work, their pros and cons, so on and so forth. But yeah, there's really not much else to say for the most part, so we could always just get started with Flame Lin's brand new Godlike Reflexes, which is effectively a defensive special that not only grants additional damage based on 15% of the unit's speed based on whether or not the conditions are met, but it also has 40% damage reduction if they can meet a speed check and it's charged, but it also works at all ranges. So anyone looking to be more of a tank, while not necessarily cutting down on your overall damage output because it does add to your damage, this isn't a bad option for a lot of speedy archetypes. However, it is also worth noting that it is locked to infantry, swords, lances, and axes. So you can't really put it on your cab, you can't put it on the flyer, armors, basically akin to Vital Astra. It does have the same restrictions, so keep that in mind whenever you do decide to go for it. But because it is a 3 cooldown special, it will be a bit more difficult to charge. As such, one of the more imperative things you need in the weapon is slaying, because with slaying, it does make it a 2 cooldown special, meaning that it is much more consistent in not only charging, but triggering during combat, which is very important for this in particular, especially if you want to get the most out of it. And in my opinion, one of the best users of this skill currently is in fact Rinkah, because not only does he have slaying in his weapon, but he also has dual phase speed based breath, which means that he doesn't need to run stuff like steady breath, flashing blade, or darting breath, or anything of the sort anywhere else in his kit because it's already built into his weapon, meaning that he can continually stack up attack and speed, run Mystic Boost for healing, so on and so forth. He definitely has a lot of flexibility in that regard. Another notable candidate is actually going to be Saber, because he does rely on having an active special ready. And he does already come with Shield Pulse, and he does have a Slaying Dagger with innate distant counter built into it, so he not only has a free A slot which can be used for pretty much anything you want. Eventually we are going to get attack speed finish, so that would be really good for him in particular because he would get sustained out of it. But at the moment, he could always use Kestrel Sands 3 with Joint Drive Attack and Darting Breath Seal, so that way he could always charge it back up as an enemy phase tank, because that's generally how he's built to be. However, you could always use this in some sort of mixed phase potential with the likes of Ira, who not only has a tempo effect, which means she's not prone to guard effects, which is really convenient, but she also has slaying, and as a result, you can actually just charge this in the player phase with Flashing Blade, get the 2 cooldown, have Godlike Reflexes immediately ready to go, and then you can just keep looping it, because once you have it charged, it'll be really difficult for her to not have it ready unless she misses the speed check. But given how fast the Ira is in general, I find that you're really not going to struggle to meet the check at all. On top of the fact that she also gets 20% flat damage reduction from her weapon anyway, she's going to be tanking quite a lot more. And if you have Godlike Reflexes active consistently, then her damage output's going to be even better. Outside of that, I did put Hatari Carla on here, and that may seem odd because it does not work with her gimmick of just adding damage based on her special, but she does have a Quicken Pulse 2 effect with slaying in her weapon, meaning that if you are looking to make her more defensive or more enemy phase oriented, you can actually do that because she will have Godlike Reflexes right out of the gate, which is really good. That combined with the likes of Attack Speed Unity, Null Follow-Up, Speed Smoke 4, Mystic Boost. It is worth noting that you can actually get both Speed Smoke 4 and Godlike Reflexes because the inheritance cost is actually pretty cheap. You just need Speed Smoke 3, or you can just get Buckler, or whatever the case may be, and you can essentially inherit both skills, which is really convenient. Beyond that, there's also Cyan Larza, who's a really notable candidate because she has no follow-up and tempo in her weapon with slaying, and because of that, she can actually go down the null counter disrupt route if you really want her to, so she could act as just a super tank, which is really cool actually because she doesn't have to give up her B slot for Shield Pulse. It is worth noting also that a lot of these units with slaying could always just run Valoria support or Groom Raphael with infantry pulse support and just have Godlike Reflexes ready to go out of the gate, but that does come at an opportunity cost, which we'll get into in a second, but regardless, realistically, any unit with slaying and good speed will probably be good with this special. So you could even use some generic like Ninja Shamir with a slaying axe, and you could always run her with some extra support, so that way she could always loop Godlike Reflexes, which is pretty convenient. However, many people may be wondering how this really compares to Vital Astra, which is also another sword, lance, axe, infantry locked special, which does also have damage reduction properties. For the most part, comparatively to Vital Astra, I find that Godlike Reflexes does have a lot going for it, comparatively, as it isn't negated by any sort of Deadeye lethality effect, as it is just a defensive special, akin to the likes of Pavis or Aegis or whatever the case may be. It doesn't get negated by those types of specials or effects, which is really, really convenient. But also, it does work at both ranges. And while Vital Astra also does, this makes it a lot more safe, as you can go up against ranged units who may otherwise have stuff like lethality or Deadeye, and won't be necessarily prone to instant death, which is pretty cool. And beyond that, if you could just consistently have it active, you're always getting a 15% bonus to your attack based on speed, which is really, really cool. How feasible that may be, it's hard to say, but if you can just consistently have it active, then you're just getting a good amount of damage on top of what you're already dealing, which is really, really cool. However, there are obvious cons to this special, like for example, it is harder to charge, and if you've noticed, all the generics are pretty much just using slaying axes or slaying edges or whatever. You really do need slaying in order to have this loop consistently. So you are losing out on other notable inheritables, but also because it does require pretty easy or quick activation, you'll more than likely either be giving up your B slot or your Sacred Seal slot, so that you can consistently loop it, as opposed to Vital Astra, which doesn't need those per se, but it is convenient to have regardless. However, with the likes of Godlike Reflexes, outside of some outliers like Rinkah, you're basically attached to the likes of breath support, or shield pulse, or infantry pulse support, just so you can have it ready to go and can consistently loop it. So in terms of just charging it and having more skills to work with, it's a bit more difficult comparatively. And going on with Vital Astra, it does hit a lot harder because it is 30% of your speed as opposed to 15% when the condition is met. It is a 2 cooldown special which can be easily charged, which is really, really convenient, not only for just getting damage out in general, but for maintaining the damage reduction effects, which is really, really good. And because you can easily charge it, you're more flexible in your skill department, as running a Slaying Edge, for example, you could just run Times Pulse, and then you could have your free B slot and your Sacred Seal for pretty much anything else. So you can have damage reduction in your special, and then you could run No Follow-Up in your B slot, and then you can basically get the tried and true No Follow-Up dodge tank combo, which a lot of sorties are known for nowadays. But nevertheless, it is worth highlighting because you're not really giving up any other slot beyond your C slot, which is arguably one of the least important ones at the moment, although it is very convenient nonetheless. But as I did mention earlier, Vital Astra is prone to the likes of Deadeye, lethality, or other similar types of effects. So while Godlike Reflexes would allow you to take hits from stuff like that, Vital Astra on the other hand will get completely shut down. So you are more prone to death as a result. But in terms of just consistency, it is a lot better. But if you are looking for a more general tanking nature with more survivability in mind, then Godlike Reflexes is probably going to be the way to go. But you have to have a slaying effect, or you can be a niche case where you can make it work in some regard, which is why you really can't go wrong with either, to be honest. Outside of Flame Lynn's new special, we also have the introduction of Dragon's Wrath 4, which not only increases the damage from 20% to 25%, as well as reduces it by 25%, but now it works in both phases, which is really, really cool because it opens more opportunities for other dragons to use this skill. So let's just get the notable ones out of the way real quick. This is just an upgrade of Dragon's Wrath 3. So naturally, the ones that were already making good use of Dragon's Wrath are going to appreciate the upgrade. So Fa, Duma, Halloween Male Grima, they're all really, really good candidates. Fa is a really good candidate because she can instantly retaliate with a 2 cooldown special thanks to the Mistletoe effect that she has in her weapon. That on top of the fact that she can run Distant Storm, Joint Drive Attack, and Bonus Doubler, she can definitely rely on one-shots a lot easier, which is really, really convenient. Duma is also a really good candidate because he also has the Domain of Flame effect in his weapon. So that combined with Dragon's Wrath 4 means that he's going to be hitting extremely hard on the first attack, especially if you were to pair it with a Breath Sacred Seal. In Distant Storm, he'll always retaliate with a Glimmer, which is really good. And beyond that, you also have Halloween Male Grima, who definitely will be relying on one-shots because of this, but they do heal back every time they trigger a special, so they can actually sustain really well as a result. You will be losing out on any sort of guaranteed follow-up, but this is more so for the idea that you're relying on one-shots. And he could potentially do it because he does get a lot of attack from his weapon, and even if he misses the kill, he is sustaining, so it's not really the worst trade-off by any means. Although if you're much more comfortable with a modernized armor, you could use Halloween Myrrh, who has a guaranteed follow-up in her weapon, but she also has damage reduction built into it on every foe's second hit. So with Dragon's Wrath 4, she could reduce it by 25, output a good amount of damage, then she could soak the next hit for whatever she gets from her weapon, so she's just reducing damage regardless, which is really good, and then she could just continue to tank. It's a good passive for her, mainly because she already has a guaranteed follow-up in her weapon, which is really convenient. And then outside of that, you could just put it on OG Muspell, who already hits really hard because of Domain of Flame. So with Dragon's Wrath 4, he'll hit even harder. And it does work in the player phase, so you aren't limited to just using in the enemy phase. But regardless, for Muspell's case, he doesn't really have a good player phase or enemy phase anyway, so I guess it really doesn't matter regardless. But let's get to the more interesting part real quick. Because it doesn't have an enemy phase condition anymore, you can put it on a lot of player phase options, such as Halloween Tiki and Fallen Lilith. Halloween Tiki already hits extremely hard because of her Frostbite Breath, granting an absurd amount of extra attack. And then with the likes of aerobatics, you can actually just teleport willy-nilly whenever you want, as long as you meet the condition, which, I mean, you just have to be anywhere near any sort of movement type that isn't a flyer, which is pretty easy to do. But regardless, with Dragon's Wrath 4, they can swoop in and pretty much reliably one-shot because they're just going to be hitting way too hard at that point. But you also have the likes of Fallen Lilith, who has her 2-space teleport gimmick, so she could always just teleport in and then aim for one-shots, which is really convenient if you are looking just to secure kills in general, because she does come with Dive Bomb, so while she will output more damage, she will be more prone to damage herself. Of course, you could also put it on Ymir, who's a really decent dragon cav. They already have supportive capabilities built into their weapon, but they do have combat prowess because of the guaranteed follow-up in their weapon, as well as the stats they get. The only caveat is that you are giving up near trace, so her ability to just hit and run is going to be a bit dwindled as a result. However, with Dragon's Wrath 4, she will be able to reliably kill much more often, because she does hit really hard as is. And again, it doesn't have an enemy phase condition anymore, so if you are looking to use her more combatively, it's not a bad option there. And then one of the better options, in my opinion, that you can easily put this on is Saros, who already comes with Dragon Wall, which is really good for damage reduction properties in general, but she can already shut down any sort of follow-up attack unless they have no follow-up. So trading out Dragon's Wall for a bit less damage reduction but extra attack isn't exactly a bad option by any means. And that's pretty much it in terms of just notable Dragon's Wrath 4 candidates. You can pretty much put this on like a lot of player phase or enemy phase dragons regardless, but it is worth keeping note that if you are going to put this on a cav, for example, then they will lose the ability to run out with near trace. Of course, you could always just position it in the correct way, dance them out, yada, but regardless, you just have to be careful. Outside of that, we do have the new inheritable sword, Flame Gunbai. I hope I pronounced that correctly and didn't butcher it. It's a pretty good weapon comparable to the likes of Vulture Blade, but I'll go into the comparisons in a second because it is worth highlighting too. In terms of just notable candidates, your best bet is just to put this on any sort of unit with high defense. So you could either just keep it on Rinkah, put it on Skyhawk, put it on Drog, literally just any sort of high defense unit. Armors in particular will already appreciate this because they already have high defense stats. So units like Drog don't actually lose out on anything. If anything, they become more bulky and they output a good amount more damage, because with this weapon, he's essentially getting plus 15 attack and defense from it, which is really good. And he can always just run a fighter skill if he just wants to securely double. But again, you can pretty much just put this on any sort of high defense unit. That's pretty much the goal, because the weapon does heavily rely on having a defense stat. That's how it works. And you may be wondering why you may want this weapon over the likes of Vulture Blade, which is easily accessible in the demo pool. And I'll give you a couple reasons. The biggest contribution to this weapon, in my opinion, is that there's no solo condition. And while solo conditions aren't inherently bad, for melee specialists in particular, you don't want to be solo because the goal is to stack up as many stats as you can so you can pretty much become a stat bomb. But you can't do that with Vulture Blade because you have to be solo. However, with Flame Gunbai, you can actually pair up near allies and just stack stats to oblivion if you are looking for a decent melee specialist. That on top of the fact that it doesn't rely on any debuffs means that you're consistently getting a fixed amount of debuffs on the foe during combat, which is really, really good. If there's any caveat, it's just that there's an HP condition, which is only really going to matter against units that either just hit way too hard for a defensive stat that you're not necessarily good in, or AoEs, which can always just shred through that bulk. But regardless, I still think it's a much bigger upgrade over Vulture Blade, and considering it is a demote sword, technically in the seasonal pool, it may be worth going for. However, it is also worth noting that Vulture Blade does have a higher ceiling for stats, as it does basically double the amount of penalties on the foe and it adds a fixed amount. So you are getting a good amount of stats regardless. But again, you do have to be solo and it is a bit more inconsistent, as there are also effects and units that can just neutralize any sort of penalty they get. So comparatively to Flame Gunbai, I find that it's a bit weaker, only on units that already have a high defense stat because they'll get a consistent amount of high debuffs regardless. But for units that have a lower defense stat, maybe like Guy, he would definitely appreciate Vulture Blade a bit more because the amount of stats he would get comparatively would be higher. So it is food for thought. If your unit does have high defense, Flame Gunbai. If they don't have high defense, Vulture Blade basically. Outside of that, we do have Speed Defense Hold, which there really isn't much to discuss on that front. It's basically the same as Speed Defense Rain, but it goes and covers 3 spaces now instead of 2. And the only thing I could really recommend with this skill in particular is some sort of supportive niche with a flyer. So if you were to get like a Rinkah, for example, with Allied Sword, Double Life and Death, Sudden Panic, and Speed Defense Hold, you can just bolster your ally stats by a fair amount while also soaking attack and speed consistently, which is pretty good. However, I would argue that when we get attack, defense, hold, that's going to be a lot better because you're essentially buffing their attack, defense, and res, which is a lot better comparatively to just buffing their speed and defense. However, it's not the worst by any means, as many units would appreciate that skill support. Beyond that though, you could always use it for niche cases that rely on speed checks like Sheeta or Naysala, as they also have speed checks they need to make. Her specifically with Flashing Blade, and Naysala just has to be faster than the foe. But he also just got a modern refund, and he's pretty fast now. Although he was fast before, but regardless, it would help. And again, it does have supportive capabilities, as you can get foes in the range of the rain, and then have your ally sweep up much more easily, which is pretty convenient. But again, outside of that, it's pretty much just speed, defense, rain. I wouldn't necessarily recommend pulling for this outside of just supportive capabilities, because that's really what the new rain are for. And to be honest, if you are looking for a really competent hold skill, you may want to hold out for attack, defense, hold, because it can provide 3 stats as opposed to speed defense, which will only provide 2. But nevertheless, the main highlights were definitely with Flame Lin's Godlike Reflexes, Flame Muspell's Dragon's Wrath 4, and Flame Gunbai from Flame Rinkah, because they're basically new. This one isn't really new per se, it's just higher scoring. But regardless, if you are pulling for any of these skills, just keep this in mind if you are looking to fodder them off. And again, I know I only provided a few amount of examples, but generally if they meet the criteria of just whatever I was specifying in each section, then they'll be able to use it quite well. But anyway, you'll have to let me know what you think down below, because I want to know if you're actually pulling in this banner. I caved for Godlike Reflexes, and you'll see why probably tomorrow or the following day, depending on when I get it out. But regardless, let me know if you pulled on the banner. I am curious, because I can't really tell if people were really excited for this banner or not really excited for this banner. It was weird, but anyway, that's all I got. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I'll see you later.